3 with Megan. I'm sorry, Megan. Scheduling is tough these days. And we have you already scheduled for next week, but you and I had a conversation this morning. And one of the things I want people to be thinking about that's an important issue is Senator Ron, this was the bill that got through finance last year was a pilot project. People have some trepidation about expanding the TIF program. So there was a question of how many new towns or projects we were going to allow in over how many years before the law sunset, and we had an ability to review what transpired and whether it was successful or whether the concerns were real or not. We landed at a pretty low number, I think, but I think the door is open to deciding how many individual projects we would allow VEPC to consider and approve, and over what period. So that's something I think we want to address the next time we meet. I think we had a 3-year period in what came out of finance, which I think some of us had some concern about, because if you sunset the law after 3 years and you want to know whether to re-up it or not, you may have not had enough experience in the increments and the private development by that time to really do justice to the review. So we may want to expand that. And another big issue we have is the cap. I think I'm leaning towards a $5 million cap on the projects. Some people would say no cap, just words. I think that's going to present some discomfort, as long as we can hit a sweet spot where most of the projects that come forward would be within that, let's say 5 million, then I think people would feel more comfortable not letting these single projects or single project-based TIFs, start approximating the value of a district. So, Megan, do you want to say a few words on that? And then I'm sorry, but we're going to have to move on to unemployment.
Not a problem. Megan Sullivan, Executive Director of the Vermont Economic Progress Council. Thanks for having me on this morning, and look forward to coming back next week for a longer discussion. But, spent a lot of time the last couple of days thinking about the question of, are there additional pieces of qualification that we can put in here? I think, the $5 million, looking at this as, a single project, the type of projects we're going to see in rural communities, that $5 million, I think is reasonable for what we're not going to see rural communities coming in with needing more increment than that for this type of gap financing. So, I think that's something that we can find reasonable. Though our preference is no cap and to use what's in there already. But if we are, looking at adding something that seems reasonable.
Mr. Chair,
what about using this as a pilot?
Right. Yep. Yeah, I can talk about that now as well. So the pilot, like you said, if communities have 3 years to incur their debt, if the pilot program is 3 years out, there's a chance that we're not really going to see much at the end of that 3 years, and would have to sort of pause the program to get those outcomes. I think realistically, 5 or 6 years would allow us to see those communities that are coming in year 1 and year 2 get started, see what type of public improvement projects are happening, get an idea of what the private developments are, what type of increment is coming in, and have more to report back on before the end of that pilot term.
And one of the things that Megan and I talked about is if we like said, okay, we want to do over those 5 years, we want to allow for 10 or 15 projects, we could front load the number of projects that were allowable in the first year or second year, and then have some more a lesser number in the later years, and stay within that 10 or 15 guidelines. So we'd have more information to deal with when hopefully this is successful, and the fears that certain people have are not warranted, or not proven not warranted, that we can make the program permanent. So, Senator Clarkson.
I'd also like to continue this discussion of the size of the community as a qualifier. Westford is a town of just less than 2,000 people. It's like 1,800 people, as I recall. And Middlebury is over 6. So I'm not sure it's the Middleburys. You know, they can qualify. They have full-time staff. They can qualify for a TIF. I mean, I just don't. I see this as a Westford size project and a Reading size project, a Bradford size project. So, I mean, I would really like us to look at the town size that may be more appropriate, like 4,000 or fewer, or, you know, whatever it is. And I've gotten a list from VLCT, you know, we're working on getting that, but I would have us consider the size of the town that we're really trying to aim at.
We will continue that discussion next week, and you can expect a call from Fred Kenny over the weekend.
Oh, I am sure I'll get one. Hi, Fred. Yeah, but you know, if we're talking about this as a something that differentiates for communities, smaller communities, that's an issue.
Okay. Any other questions for Megan before we let her go? Thank you, Megan, and my apologies again.
Thanks. No problem. Have a great weekend.
Okay.
You too.
Bye.
All right, so I'm going to move on to Damien. Actually, I think where we were last, when we left off on this, was Matt was giving us a preview of some of his new charts, and I'd like to pick up there. So we're going to hopefully focus today on, this is the second half of the bill, or a separate bill dealing with rate relief and increased or enhanced benefits, and the costs of doing those proposals. Matt, I don't know if you're the right person to explain this to us, but I would like a practical and theoretical explanation of the proposal. As you recall, last year from the department, maybe we mistakenly we were asking the number of how much that was going to help employers in terms of dollars, and this was to go from level 1 to level 3 as opposed to 1 to level 5, and the number was in the $30 million or something. Maybe we weren't told, or we didn't ask the right question, but now I'm understanding that that's sort of not a complete savings to businesses. It's more like a no interest loan that they wind up paying back at a later date in your chart in the 10-year period. So can you explain how that works and try and keep it in lay terms?
Sure. Yes. Good morning, everyone. For the record, I'm Matthew Bearwitz, Director of the Economic and Labor Market Information Division with the Vermont Department of Labor. Thank you so much for having me back today. Happy to pick up the conversation, and I appreciate the chair's opening remarks because you know, I think it's couched well. All day long I try and think of analogies of how to kind of explain these certain things, and as it relates to contributions from employers, in some ways it is akin to a loan. If you borrowed $10 and said you're going to pay back $10 in a month, and then after a month you said I'll give you $5 now, and I'll give you $5 a month from now, by paying back only $5 after a month, you wouldn't consider that like a savings, so to speak. You still are on the obligations down the road to make that up. So employers, we're speaking about them generally. The employers who made payments last year might not be in business today and down the road, but as it relates to the proposals, from the administration and some of the numbers we've looked at, you're correct when we're talking about the level of impact between schedules. This is what we talked about in September. This is a deferred. We're saying, the amount of contributions that we need today might be a little different than what we think. So that's kind of the way I'd open it, unless, how I was thinking about starting today's conversation is actually really diving back and trying to get to core concepts for the trust fund, because yesterday started kind of like fast, and I'm not sure if the chair would want to do that with a quick 2-minute overview to kind of ground us in how the trust fund works, how the benefits and contributions flow. But I did kind of think about that so that we could kind of have this conversation and compare the current situation to where we were at in 2007, because the 2007 situation, leading up to that, benefits had been indexed without an adjustment to contributions. So a trust fund functions very much as it should, where you're trying to build up money in the trust fund during economic good times, so that when the economic bad times hit, we have something to draw down on. So during the 2000s, because benefits were moved up, but nothing was done to contributions, the trust fund was losing money slowly over the 2000s, even though those were good years. So my predecessor informed me that he started these conversations with the State House, basically saying, hey, you got to watch this because the trust fund is losing money and we're in economic good times. Well, I think those early conversations really prepped the elected officials so that when the economic downturn of 2007 happened, they were able to react quickly, thoroughly, and as a result, the grand bargain was imposed, and it was done as a quote unquote share the pain, was a term that was used at that time, share the pain, so that claimants kind of had experienced some of the benefits were limited in certain ways. In this example, pain, I don't like the word share the pain, but that's how it was described. And then employers were ultimately made to increase contributions so that the trust fund would regain solvency or adequacy. We were in a borrowing situation at that point, so we had to do something, and the state reacted very positively. Our federal partners were very pleased with the responsiveness of this. As a result, of the grand bargain, there was provisions in it that claimants would ultimately be made whole, relative to where they were. So their loss in some ways was capped. So once we got back to Schedule 3, everything was kind of rebalanced within the benefits calculation to kind of put it back. And even in my notes, I wrote but for, and then I happened to be listening to your previous testimony about but for not being really a welcome term in this room. So I apologize, but but for the last economic downturn, claimants were made whole as a result of the grand bargain. Once we got back to Schedule 3, employers continue to pay elevated levels of contributions. And I think this is where we were talking maybe a couple of weeks ago, when we look at on a per person basis, employers in the 2000s were paying about $200.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Of course.
That's not my recollection. I think there was triggers to lower employers' contributions as well when the fund got healthier, like the 16,000 down to the 14,000. So I don't know how you can say that employers would continue to get the hit. And the other thing I think is that you're missing in the grand bargain is that you did say it in some ways. What precipitated part of the problem is that everybody recognized that employer contributions forever were going down by the result of inflation because it was just fixed, and we had to start increasing as the value of money went down. And so that was one of the fundamental changes, that we increased contributions by employers, and but we did have a provision in there just recently in January. We lowered the employers' rates or the taxable wage base. So I don't know how you can say that we didn't make any adjustment for a healthy economy for employers.
I didn't mean to imply that, Mr. Chair. So thank you for stopping me there, because that's where I was going with this conversation, is that claimants were ultimately made whole. So they had kind of had this cap loss. So the freezing of the maximum weekly benefit, the 1 week waiting period, those things all either sunsetted or were reset back to kind of pre-recession levels. Employers, they were triggers to ease up on the throttle, which you talk about the $2,000 reduction in taxable wage base, but you'll recall that coming into the grand bargain, the taxable wage base was like $8,000. And by this point, when we started kicking in the taxable wage base decreases, we were already up to $16,000. So the taxable wage base is effectively been doubled since pre-bargain. I'm not saying what's right or wrong, because as you're pointing out, there needs to be a steady flow of contributions into the trust fund. But when this grand bargain was done in 2007, 8, 9, it was best information at that time of what the fund needed based on the information we had, and the fund performed very well. And I think if there was no global pandemic, we would be coming into this conversation, we would be having the same conversation, but it would be under the guise of share the gains. That the trust fund was super healthy, we'd be saying, okay, how can we maybe you'd be asking, how can we help claimants more? How can we ease back on contributions? Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, though, we're not in a situation where we're talking about sharing the gains. We're trying to understand how to weather extreme economic uncertainty. Employers, and this is where I was going before the previous recession, were paying about $200 in UI taxes per employee. As a result of the grand bargain, their taxes per employee, covered employee, went to about $650 from the years of 2012 to 2017. So tax rates tripled in that time period. And just as 2017 happened, that's when we started easing back. The health of the trust fund had returned over that short period of time, much faster than anticipated. So the rate of contributions, the rate of flow into the trust fund was healthier than anticipated. And as a result, because of the governing mechanisms associated with the trust fund, it started to naturally ease back, plus the provisions you mentioned about reducing the taxable wage base. But still, nonetheless, by 2019, we were the per covered employee rate of taxes was $500. So about 2.5 times where it was in 2000s. Again, not considering anything for inflation. These are nominal terms. And I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm just saying that the employers are continuing to pay and maintain a high level of tax rate relative to 2000s. And so the conversation we're talking about, I think that the administration is trying to highlight, is saying what needs to be in the trust fund, because at this point, the way it's going to play out with the information we have available, taxes will either double or triple in the next 6 months for Vermont businesses. And no one's trying to say that this is a share the gain situation, because we know claimants are struggling, employers are struggling. And so I think that's why the focus of the conversation on the administration side is to say, we know definitively that as it stands right now, the health of the trust fund is such that contributions will, or the calculations associated with the health of the trust fund will merit the increasing of the tax rate schedule from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5. And they're trying to say what type of relief can be provided to alleviate that, provide some sort of cost certainty to employers as they're trying to get their bearings during this economic uncertainty.
Okay. I think my original question and hope was that you would explain why the projection in savings last year of $36 million was not the full story because of I guess the mechanisms that essentially projected would have employers in the out years paying more than they would otherwise pay if we didn't change the law here or didn't give them any rate relief. So it's more in the form of they get deferred payments now, but it catches up to them later. I was less interested in trying to say who got a better deal back in 2010. That's history, and I'm sure there are people who can argue the other side of that equation, but I just don't think it's worth trying to analyze one way or another. It is what it is. It was a bargain, and that's where we are now. And I don't think
I
that
100% agree. I 100% agree. And that's why I'm not trying to say what's right or wrong. I'm just trying to say what is. And I think it provides important context into terms of where we are coming into where the trust fund is now and how we know this calculation is going to respond. So, the important questions to me still remain about what is the, for this committee, what is the appropriate level of balance in the trust fund? So through the night, I certainly did the calculations that you asked, Mr. Chair, as well as Senator Brock. Just kind of reloaded in my brain all the scenarios that could transpire as far as worst case scenarios, and I'm prepared to discuss that. And so however you see fit. This idea that I think to your point, and I can apologize if need be, the conversations that we were having in September when I was talking about this is the difference in 1 year, that's the only capacity we had at that time to say we were trying to understand, we're running a breakneck speed in the pitch black, right? And so we could see as far as our nose at that point based on where we were in the pandemic in the fall. We didn't even know how the rest of 2020 was going to end. So as a result, I was preparing, theoretical kind of guideposts about what is the incremental difference within a 1 year time period of changing the tax rate schedule, of changing the taxable wage base, all under that guise of we're under complete economic uncertainty, as well as understanding that when we return to this conversation in January, we'd have a greater picture because 2020 would be in the rearview mirror, as well as we would be submitting our annual report, which would be a fuller 10-year outlook and forecast. So I apologize if the 1 year snapshot that we were giving, which were right in front of our face in the fall, based on the best information we had at that time, was incomplete. In no way was meant to allude that is how the deferred payments for contributions would go.
I guess I think seeing numbers and charts would really help. I mean, I just remember seeing tons of charts way back when, and they were very helpful in showing how the proposed changes impacted on a global sense the employer community and the employee community. So if I could maybe we can pull up some of those charts now, but I remember seeing like in a few years in your chart for 10 years, it seems like benefits going out were predicted to be in the $80 million range for beneficiaries in 2023 or 24. So, and we're only talking about in terms of benefit increases a 1 year thing. But if the base amount, let's say just hypothetically, is $100 million, and we want to raise benefits by 20% across the board, now benefits would be $120 million. And for the getting back again to my original question, I would like to see the I guess the 10-year run on the contributions. What it would be with no change of the law in the next year. I don't know if it's calendar year or fiscal year or whatever it is, how you calculate that. But if it's going to drop by virtue of the wage base being frozen and the table 1 through 5 being frozen, let's again assume that it's going to drop in a round number. Employer contributions are going to drop by $1 million. That may be well overstated, but let's just use that for a figure. Then you put it side by side and say, okay, in the next 10 years, existing law, the employer community benefits next year by $100 million, but in year 10, they're paying, and year 6 through 10, they're paying $20 million more than if we didn't change the law. That's what I'm trying to understand and see, because you made a figure saying that the only savings to the employer community by all of the governor's new proposals is a total of $10 million. That's markedly different than a weaker version of the governor's proposal that last year in the first year saved $36 million.
Again, dialing back to some earlier testimony, I don't agree with the term savings, but understand the point you're trying to make. As provided in the annual trust fund report, there's a detail a table that sounds like it would meet your needs, as well as the last two testimonies. I submitted similar tables on both proposals. So I believe the information has been provided to the committee. I understand that Zoom does not make it always easy to look at all these things together, but in my last attempt to try and combine some of this thing into similar graphs, I didn't get positive feedback that was actually helpful. So I'm kind of,
Okay.
the information has been provided in terms of 10-year forecast for benefits and contributions under all three scenarios. I welcome feedback on how best to facilitate the discussion. I'm here at your service to provide information, help you make a decision.
I hear you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Can we just pull up is there a way to pull up the last chart?
Sure. I don't know if Nathan has that capacity. If you'd prefer, I just screen share.
Let's screen share. Yeah.
Okay. And as far as the last chart, are you specifically speaking to what was kind of probably poorly labeled the committee proposal, which would be
Sure.
include the benefits? Okay. Okay, it should be coming through just momentarily, and I'll make sure to zoom in a little bit. This is just, again, a look at the proposed change, what we're calling committee. This includes both the administration's proposal about freezing the tax rate schedule, limiting future tax rate schedules increase to 2, a maximum of 2, as well as a freeze of the taxable wage base in 2022. So, there is a mirror image of this table for the baseline forecast, just the administration's proposal and the committee's, and it includes a graph at the bottom here, kind of showing, and the graph looks very similar, except how this little tranche works its way out. And this is why when I was talking about, maybe I'll just leave it here. I'd be happy to talk about the details of this particular proposal, or we can scroll down to show a side-by-side comparison of the differences in benefits and the differences in contributions and the differences in the unemployment insurance trust fund balance.
Yeah, I guess what I'm looking for in this first chart you have in front of you, I was hoping this is with the administration and the committee or my suggestion for benefit increases.
That's correct.
I was hoping to see within this chart, what would the status quo be if we do nothing?
If we do nothing, I could switch over to the baseline forecast if you like. Unfortunately, it would require us to switch, not have both up simultaneously. The closest thing I could have to comparing of the baseline versus the committee's proposal would be looking at something like this, which, and I can talk about the details of it, but basically this is how the money would flow in and out. So
that's helpful, but I was looking for it in terms of I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to, I guess what I was trying to ask for what further direction you could have in terms of charts. Could you take that first chart and just put additional columns that show existing law as to what those numbers would be for benefits paid, maximum weekly benefit amount, contributions, and tax rate schedule and taxable wage base, so we can see what we're changing and what being proposed to be changed and the impact on the trust fund benefits paid and all these things. That's what I mean, remember we talked about that. I said, that's what I was having trouble. And you're absolutely right. Zoom is a problem. And so we keep trying, I keep trying to go back and forth and put them side by side. I'm just wondering if we could put them in one chart, both the proposal and what the existing law does.
Okay. Yeah, that I could do. Easy. This is the underlying data. So all the data is there. It's just a question of presentation, and you'd like to see it numerically in a table as opposed to in a graph. I can do that.
Well, let's just go to the graph for now, because you don't have what I'm asking for. So maybe I can get a sense.
And I can tell you the numerical differences. I have that information. Again, I just think it's helpful to kind of see as the flow of the money, stock of the money comes in and out, how they're different. So this is, I think, what you were talking about earlier, the blue lines being the baseline forecast. You can see how quickly the taxes will ramp up for the rate of contributions, I should say. And the administration's proposal as part of the committee's proposal is just saying maybe we can gradually increase that as opposed to a ramp rate up during this most uncertain time for businesses. Ultimately, you can see that the fund will catch up because contributions will be higher in the out years. And the only difference between the administration and the committee proposal as it relates to contributions is this little couple nubs here, and the reason is because the increased benefits in the early years, it triggers a staying on a Schedule 5 in the out years for a year longer. So these increased benefits here on a state fiscal year, July to June, would cause the fund to stay at level 5 1 year longer. That's this line right here. In 2025, it's projected. So that's why this is these contributions for the committee are a little bit higher in these out years because there's been more money taken out of the fund. As a result, it cannot drop to a lower schedule at an earlier time. But ultimately, you can see they all kind of catch up. And that's just kind of the way the fund works. It's meant to kind of self-regulate in terms of what it needs in contributions. And I think that's just why we're having this conversation is the fear. And so the one other thing I would make is I really see them as totally separate in terms of, I've been, again, thinking of an analogy, and the closest I can think of is a wood pellet stove. The temperature that you set your wood pellet stove, that is definitely like the benefits, the comforts, the basic necessity of having heat in your home in winter, right? But on the flip side, how much contributions, how much fuel is being poured into the pellet stove? You can fill up that hopper so it runs for an entire week or two. And that's like how much pellets do we want to be sitting in the stove, potentially sitting idle? Or said differently, how much pellets in the stove do we need to just at least get us through the next time that we can until we at least feel comfortable getting through this next cold spell, so to speak. So that's why I think they're very separate. And so if we were talking about benefits, I'd want to be looking at comparisons of us to other states. I'd want to be looking at all the federal programs that Vermonters have been able to qualify. I'd want to be looking at the benefits actually received by individuals. And to my logic, whether benefits are adequate is a separate conversation of whether contributions are adequate.
Okay, I think I finally understand the charts. So the information I was looking for, I still would like to see in the numerical incorporated into the first one, but now I see that information is here in these graphs. I mean, so I could actually do the chart myself with these bar graphs, but if you could do that for us and put it in numbers in the first format, I think people can see the changes that are being suggested both by the administration and the committee here. So that will be helpful the next time around. And I apologize if I didn't focus on that in the bar graphs. Okay, so getting back to my first question again, it's because of the mechanisms that we have in law that even if we defer some payments or change the contributions by the employers, let's just look at this for a second. Let's look at this bar graph so we can talk about it today on contributions. Contributions. So it looks like, roughly speaking, in 2022, the contributions on the baseline will go from 180 to 125 or something as a result of the proposals, and this is the proposals of freezing both the wage base and the schedule 1 to 5. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have, you're putting something here? These are the raw data numbers here? Okay. Whoops.
Oh, I didn't know you could see that. So yeah, I was just going over to look at the distribution.
Yeah, no, like we can't see those small numbers, numerical numbers. We just see the bar. I just see the bar graph.
Oh, okay.
So maybe it would help to, maybe it'd be easier as opposed to me estimating here.
Don't we see the millions of dollars on the left and the dates? I mean,
Yeah, I know, but it's an eyeball thing, right? I think those bar graph numbers.
oh yeah, no, it's a total eyeball.
So I think the thing I just briefly saw of those raw data numbers actually.
Yeah, and then you have to flip back to Matt's, the numbers up above to see, with additional benefit, the rate schedule and the wage base, up above.
Where do you see that?
There, here, right
No,
there. Yeah.
This doesn't show the difference from existing law though, does it?
No, that's the one thing that we don't have is the base here. That, if we did nothing, what would it look like? These are all assuming the changes we've talked about.
Correct. And that's
So-
what Matt's gonna incorporate.
Right, and so if you incorporated that, but it does, but 22 and 23 on the next ones, yeah, I guess it does go up. Yeah, I was thinking I thought the proposal was that we were gonna freeze it at 3 for a little bit longer, but it goes to 5 in 23. I thought we were gonna like freeze it for 2 years.
What's on the screen now? What's on the screen now, Matt, is existing law?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm still trying to even figure out what you can see of my screen while I'm sharing.
Oh,
Because I
mean
swear
up
one time,
above?
like,
We can now see up above it, the yeah,
a tax rate schedule and the UI trust fund balance and what the projected balances would need to be. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yes, Matt.
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. So I didn't know, I thought one time someone indicated that the screen sharing did not track what I was looking at and it held what I chose to screen share, but it now seems like you can see what I'm looking at on this monitor. So
Depends on whether you screen share your screen or the actual document.
Right. Thank you, Michael.
that's good stuff. Thank you, sir.
So,
But-
what are, okay, I think we're gonna come back to this with the side-by-side incorporated with existing law and the projections. But in terms of the other issue here of, the threshold of the on and off of $90 million, this, this chart on existing law shows a fairly healthy trust fund balance from what I'm used to seeing, of $1 billion in the out years. What are the assumptions here? Are they conservative assumptions? I mean, they obviously don't envision another major pandemic happening, this summer or something. But what are the
Yeah.
assumptions? How safely can we rely upon this if we just say using existing law?
Yeah, that's a great question. And let's see if we can get this here. I'm dialing it back to historical trend just to give us confidence in what we're talking about moving forward. The forecast, you're correct. It does not include any economic downturns. A lot of times we'll do 2 forecasts, a baseline forecast and a theoretical recession. Since we're in a recession and there are so many unknowns, it seemed nearly impossible to come up with a second scenario about what a recession looks like. So what has been modeled is relatively conservative. It's best estimates. There's, it's not modeled to go too high or too low. So there could be a plus minus on both sides. The downside risk is definitely in the benefits. The contributions is a pretty stable, funding source in the way our statute is currently written. And going back just briefly to the grand bargain, based on the information we made at that time, or the decisions made at that time, you can see from when the grand bargain took effect in 2011, 2012, how quickly the trust fund regained health. From 2013 to 2019, it accumulated nearly $400 million. And so this is a very short period of time. And this trend line is very similar to what we would see in the baseline forecast, because it is going to, because the way statute is currently written, it wants us to look at our worst year, which is 2020, and base our health of our trust fund on that. So our old health of our trust fund was around, it was like 350 million. So this is when we started hitting Schedule 1. We were getting tax rate schedule decreases because we were getting, or the taxable wage base went down an additional $2,000 because of the tax rate schedule being at Schedule 1. So it was trying to slow down. So you can see even the rate of growth was slowing down. But even so, at the rate of benefits that were being paid out in 2019 and the rate of contributions coming in, we were still going to accrue money in the trust fund. So I think as written, and I think you alluded to this in prior conversations, Mr. Fair, is that, it is possible that this rate of increase might be a little fast in terms of maybe there needs to be some rebalancing of the rate of contributions. Otherwise, it is going to look like this. We, barring getting a recession in here, which again is possible. We're trying to build up the health of the trust fund, but because our worst year is going to be based on a bad year of 387 million in benefit payouts, the trust fund thinks to get to Schedule 3, it's going to need at least approximately $600 million, between 600 and 7.75. But it won't get to Schedule 1 until you hit $1 billion. So these contribution amounts are pretty solid, depending on how we change this or how any changes that might happen to the tax rate schedule, the taxable wage base. But we consistently collect about 100 to $120 million in contributions, depending on what the taxable wage base is and the tax rate schedule. And once we get up to Schedule 5, we'll be back collecting a lot more money. And so again, the real risk is what are the benefits going to be? And I think this is what Senator Brock was talking about last time. And that's why I refreshed my memory on what we had done for a worst case scenario as it relates to benefits.
Just a quick question, is the year calendar year in this chart or fiscal year?
It shows calendar year, and then the little letters tell you what it means. So the UI Trust Fund balance, this is a year-end balance. The benefits paid is a year total. The maximum weekly benefit changes in July. Contributions is a year total. And the tax rate schedule changes in July. And the taxable wage base is set in January.
The contributions would be from
calendar year
1 to June 30th.
No, these are calendar year. So this is January to December, both the benefits and contributions. That's how we track this. So these are calendar years to the best of the ability.
Okay, but the tax rate schedule changes on July 1st, right?
Right. So
contributions and benefits sort of bridge 2 years in some ways in comparison to the rate schedule.
Yes, 100% correct. And that's what makes it a little bit of a lag. So you would expect, if you're jumping from Schedule 1 to Schedule 5, I've previously testified that you would see a surge in benefits by about $70 to $80 million. But because it actually goes into effect in July, you're only getting about a half a bump. And so it actually, for the full schedule for that full increase to actually work its way through to be on a calendar year basis, you can see it's a longer runway. And that's, again, just the way the money flows in and out of this. And that's why it's so important that we kind of track the flow of money and when these changes happen, because we know winter is our heavy benefit payout year or season, as well as a low contribution received season at the same time. So, when you hear the Director Wood talk about Q1 and making sure we have cash flow to meet our obligations, that's what we're talking about, is how the flow of the money comes in and out. and how responsive the fund is to the changes that are currently on the books.
So let me, thank you for that. Let me move, I want to focus on so we could start getting a feel on the $90 million threshold is for the on-off switch of these changes. So the committee understands in the proposal again, and I don't know if it's changed this year, but the department would look at where the trust fund was as of December, or was projected to be as of December, and if it was below $90 million, which you can see in this chart under existing law, we probably should be looking at the proposal chart. It's nowhere near that. But I think Senator Brock had said, well, what if we have another crisis? Do we have enough to afford to make these changes? The first question is, the department still suggesting that figure? And if you are, given it being so remote that we're going to get to that figure, could we afford to raise that a couple of multiples and still extremely likely give these relief to businesses and perhaps to benefits to claimants, and not face the trigger? But if we did have a crisis, we would be prepared for that crisis. I don't know if that's for you, Matt, or for the commissioner, but and I don't know if you understood the question, but I tried.
Yeah, I think I'll turn it over to the commissioner or Cam to speak on actually I can talk about the 90 million. It was initially, I think at that time in the fall, thought that was going to be what would be necessary at a minimum to get us through a bad first quarter. I might be speaking out of school here, but I think well, I'll just leave it at that. I don't know. I don't know the status of the administration's proposal of the 90 million.
Okay,
So
Commissioner,
that's
before
what-
you answer the question, let me just, if it's not obvious, what I'm trying to get at is, I guess another way of saying it is, I'm uncomfortable with just having a trigger that gets us through the first quarter, and then we would come back and have to change the law to protect us going forward in a really bad situation. I'd rather start with a higher number and, protect against that bad situation. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Fully understand. I actually think we maybe have amended that language, and I would look to Cameron, but I think in talking with Damien, we had just talked about maybe a more abstract calculation of solvency or determination of solvency, not a hard number, because I think it gets to your point about what solvency looks like or what that threshold needs to be. So it may be taking a look back over the past prior 12 months to figure out a more concrete or more dependable number. I think to Senator Brock's comments, if we saw ourselves in another situation like we did last March, I mean, that threshold is actually higher than where we are right now, because we've actually spent more in benefits and going out the door than we have left in contributions in the fund. So if there were no more contributions that were to be received by the fund right now, we wouldn't have enough money in the fund because we're below the halfway point of where we started last March. So I think what we did try to do is look at a couple different aspects. One, originally the 90 million came from what it would take to get us through what would be a heavy winter season, and then to the next contribution of the first quarter, which is typically our largest contribution quarter. But I think, Cameron, if you wanted to add, I think there was conversation about just a calculation method as opposed to a hard number that really took into account more of the performance over the past year, that would give us more insight as to whether we were in a healthy position or not. Cameron? I think you had the last conversation with Damien. That's why I'm looking to you.
Yeah, real quick. I mean, when I was working with Damien on the new language to be proposed, we felt it best to just utilize what was in the provision that was proposed last year in September, because that would get us as a starting point. We had to start somewhere, and we didn't want to, come into the committee at the beginning of the presentation or the beginning of the conversation with a different number. And then there would be questions about, well, why did we come up with a different number? So we felt it best to just start with where we were at last year. I really stand by what I testified to last time. I mean, the 90 million came from a point in time instance where we were determining, based on the claims volume we had at that time, what would we need to get us through the first quarter. I recognize, Mr. Chair, your point, which is, well, we don't want to put ourselves in a bad position if things go south where we're having to scramble in the first quarter. So, I can understand potentially having that number be higher. I wouldn't want to set the number so high that it prohibits us from enacting what we feel is necessary to help alleviate the burden on employers. So, what do we need? I think
I or the committee, I think. We don't want, but we want to find this sweet spot. So I
Yes, sir.
think we have to come, if there is a bad situation, we don't have to come back in the first
Right.
couple of weeks and raise everybody's taxes or cut benefits again.
Yes.
And it just seemed like the $90 million is
Mhm.
just trying to get us through April or something in a bad case
And-
scenario. I think
Yes, sir. And
a little bit more conservative. I'm very open to the idea of language and some sort of formula. I'd like to see that for our next hearing, if you could work that, if that's the direction you want to go, and work with Damien to do that rather than a number. I'm all ears to that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that it clarifying whatever would be a trigger for a change rather than a hard dollar threshold.
So this may, I apologize, this may be a good breaking point. We have pushed back some witnesses at 11 o'clock already. The committee probably can use a few minutes for a break, but I want to give the department a chance to make any further comments right now. I think we're taking this up Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. You probably have been invited in again, but if you want to say something more right now, otherwise we're going to break and pick up with housing and conservation a little bit after 11.
Keisha has a question.
Senator Romm.
This is sort of a request for next week if it's available, but I've just been looking at other states that have a small bump in benefit for dependents. And Massachusetts and Rhode Island, for example, have a bump in benefit for dependents. So I was wondering if you're already tracking those claimants who have dependents. I imagine that's a sort of tax merging question, and if you might be able to bring that information with you next week.
I would add, well, Cam, I think you and I are probably on the same page, which is we do not track claimants who have dependents because it is not part of the way the system is designed. So we track individuals' hours of employment and wages earned, but the system doesn't track necessarily whether or not you are dependent or not, because that doesn't impact somebody's weekly benefit amount.
But it does talk to the tax system at some point, or aren't we changing that? So you can, wouldn't you be able to know from tax filings?
We do not. We are using the work that we're doing with the tax department is around validation of identity, not sharing of specific tax contributions or whether they're filing as dependents. So that would require a statutory change. I think the piece I will put out there, and we do have a memo that will be coming to the committee later today. I think, Our proposal is around employer relief for job retention and job growth. At this point, the department does not support the increase or recalculation of benefits for a couple different reasons. But I think specifically, our system is not designed to go in and manually calculate rate changes for individuals. So it would be a extremely and I'm not even sure possible to go in and make mainframe coding changes that would change the calculation method for paying out and determining benefits for folks. So when we talk about something like a 20% increase across the board, that's actually a mainframe coding situation. That is not the way the benefit calculation is hard coded into the system. So then it would require an extremely heavy lift to go in and recode the benefit calculation process. The same if we wanted to add additional benefits for dependents. The system is not designed to calculate a dollar amount per a dependent and then add it to someone's benefit amount. So as we're talking about these changes, I would just ask that, you know, we are extremely handicapped by the system we have, and we have been warned multiple times that significant changes to the base coding of the system can risk significant and potentially catastrophic failure of the system.
Okay, so my response to that, I'd like to hear more about that because I've been involved in many, many statutory changes that affected benefits. And it's the first time I've heard this concern. I mean, certainly in terms of the maximum, we could raise the maximum without.
Sure. But the system was coded for the maximum. Right. The system was coded for the maximum to be recalculated on an annual basis. The system was coded to have a minimum or no minimum. The system was calculated to have a percentage. So again, the changes that have been made in the past with regards to statute have kept the calculation algorithm the same. So it's when you start stepping out of the actual equation and making changes and wanting a different equation that you start risking the integrity.
Are you saying that if we decided we were in hard times and we wanted to freeze the maximum, you couldn't do that?
No, you can, like I said, the system is designed to have a maximum amount, and you can determine whether the maximum should go up at the rate, it should freeze, or it should fall at the rate that it's set at. What is not currently coded into the system is we want to calculate the benefit amount for all 30,000 individuals, and then the system is then going to add a 20% increase on top of that calculation, and then have the system designed to pay out a 20% increase on that calculation, because a 20% increase is not an equation that's hard coded into the system. But for something like
but you've been able to add a set benefit that the feds gave us, for example.
Correct, because that was hard.
What you're saying is, if we did a set benefit addition to complement the break for the employers, that would be easier than a percent calculation that it can't deal with.
Correct,
Right.
because the system was designed to be able to add a flat amount on top of the benefit.
Okay.
Got it.
Now, again, the amount can be whatever. It can be 300, it can be 600. We can change the amount, but the
the calculation is the problem. To recalculate for every individual
Yes, ma'am.
is the challenge. Got it. I hear that. I understand that.
No, you're doing great.
I understand that as well. And the suggestion of the 20% was just a placeholder to see how much it would cost.
Absolutely, I understand that.
There may be different ways to make it work within the system. I remember way back when we did some changes to benefits, we reduced and then subsequently increased the percentage of wage replacement for the general population that wasn't subject to the maximum.
Correct.
By changing the denominator of the number of weeks. And somehow that was done both up and down
Yes.
in the law in 2010. So we're not wedded to the idea was just to get the the approximate number.
Well,
Absolutely
okay.
understand. And I wanted to just put that out there as we were talking about other factors that may change someone's benefit amount, like a dependency situation.
Right.
The system is not designed to consider a dependency and then add an amount automatically. So again, when we talk about changes, we should just talk about changes based on the capabilities of the current system.
Got it.
Got it.
Thank you.
Got it.
That's helpful.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry to cut people off. We'll take 3 minutes and come back at 11:05. And I don't know what the order is, but we'll let Chris Donnelly run the show for 25 minutes. Thank